If you have your Bibles, turn to Mark, or Matthew chapter 5. We're continuing on in the Sermon on the Mount with the third beatitude. In your bulletins as well, I'll be reading from the NIV this morning. And part of this, the eight attitudes or postures that Jesus says are blessed. We're looking at the third one this morning, meekness, but we'll start at the beginning. In Matthew 5, verse 1, it says, "Now when he," that's Jesus, "saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth.'" This is the word of the Lord. And I think it's worth starting out this way. Most pastors would, when they talk about meekness, when you think of the word meek, what is it that comes to mind?
Weakness.
Yeah, and so you'll see that in every commentary, meekness is not weakness. It's not what the word means. It's not wimpy. It's not like a limp handshake. And that's the worst, isn't it? Like whether it's a girl or a guy, and it's like you're shaking a wet noodle. It's like, oh, terrible. It's like it's the worst. You know it is. You're just afraid. Can we say that on it? Yes, you can. Is a meek person someone who's afraid to stand up for themselves or stand up for others? Is a meek person someone who's afraid to speak their mind? Is that what meekness is? No. And I asked this because we got the slide here. I took a screenshot from this morning, and you can advance this, Jay. Please. Thank you. Meekness here. You type in meekness in Google, and look what it says. It says, "The fact or condition of being meek, submissiveness. All his best friends make fun of him for his meekness." Isn't that interesting? Meek. Weak. I think it's got a bit of a bad rap because it's not weakness. And there's an old hymn by Charles Wesley called "Gentle Jesus." Do you guys know that one? Gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Look upon a little child. He pairs meekness with mildness. And that really takes you, I think, in the direction that you're not meant to go. And I think the reason he uses mild with meek is because he needed something to rhyme with child. And don't think about this too long. There's not a lot that rhymes with child. So he chose mild. Yeah, that's going to have to do. But that's not what meekness is either. Meekness is not mildness. Lester, where's Lester? There you go. I did that the other week and you were gone. I'm like, where'd you go? Lester, tandoori. You like it, don't you?
I take it.
If I said, "Lester, I'm going to take you out, we're going to have a nice mild curry," what would you say? Hard pass?
No way, Jose.
Yeah. Let's just be honest. Is mild curry worth eating? No. Yes. There's always one. There's always one. I was out with Louie last night at Boston Pizza, and we had some good pizza. And he asked for hot sauce. She's like, "Well, what do you want?" And he's like, "What do you got?" And she's got three types. She says, "We have mild, medium, and hot." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you right now, you can just leave the mild one aside, because it's not, let's not waste our time here." What good is mild? Mild. Maybe in cheddar. Anything else is a waste of time. Meekness is not mildness. It's not weakness. It's not limpness. It's not wimpiness. It's not someone that lacks strength. In fact, if you look at Jesus in Matthew, is it 11:29? The one that says, "Come to me, all you who are burdened and weary." He says, "Because I am gentle," which is meek. That's what the word means, praus. "I am meek and humble." Okay, so that's Jesus. I want to tell you something. Jesus is not mild curry. He's not. Jesus could be an absolute bear. Jesus could be an absolute lion when it came to matters of faith. And there's a reason, children are important. There's a reason we take time in our service to celebrate children and do stories. Because Jesus he elevates kids. He says, no, it's not all about you adults. In fact, the disciples, they try and stop the kids from coming because they got better things to do. And he gets angry. turns into a bear. Jesus sees what people are doing in his Father's house, how they've turned it, and they're exchanging money, and what does he do? He makes a whip. And he goes in there and he's cracking the whip and he's turning over tables. That's not a wimpy guy. Jesus is in the synagogue and the religious authorities there. There's always those religious people looking for a chance to point something out. And it says that they're looking to bring charges against Jesus. And what does Jesus do? Jesus is like, "Ooh, better not do anything. Don't want to cause waves. Don't want to make people mad. Don't want to cause trouble." What does he do? He sees a man with a withered hand who's been suffering, who the religious people they're not doing anything about. And he looks at him, he looks at the Pharisees, he's like, "Let's get this party started." And he says, "Stretch out your hand, be healed. What you going to do about that?" And he knew darn well what they were going to do. The text says they went out and plotted how they might kill him. He knew that. Jesus tells Peter has just confessed that Jesus is the Messiah. And Jesus is like, "The Son of Man must be killed and 3 days later raised from the dead." And what does Peter say? "No, never, not on my watch. That'll never happen to you, Lord." What does he call him? Satan. Jesus could stand up to people, calls them whitewashed tombs. You're plastic, you're fake, you're a phony. He could stand up. He is the epitome of weakness, but he is not mild curry. He is not weak. He had a backbone. He was fiery. He had a spine. He was strong. But yet he's meek. So what is meekness? I shared a couple months back that, because we looked at the fruit of the Spirit, and you remember that in Galatians 5? And one of the fruit of the Spirit is gentleness. It's this word, praus. It's meek. And meekness, we looked at, actually means strength, but under control. And I shared about how a prof had done some work in the classical Greek, and because he was really confused by this, because what does it mean to be meek? And he said meekness would actually be used to describe a powerful man who had been trained to use a sword, a soldier, and he knew how to swing it. But if he was meek, he knew when to keep it in its sheath. And even when provoked, he wouldn't pull it out. That's meekness. Strength under control. Meek. There's a book, some of you in your devotions have probably come across Matthew Henry. Does that name ring a bell? He was, 100 years ago, he was alive. And he has a book called A Discourse on Meekness. And he points out that in the Latin, which that would have been kind of almost commentary on the Greek language, the word that was used in Latin to translate the Greek word praus, and I hope I pronounced this right, was mansuetus. And when we have that up here, mansuetus, it's a Latin word, and it's actually two words. And so the next slide, you'll see this. Manu means hand, and asuetus means used to. So here's what it means. It means used to the hand. Mansuetus. That's how they translated meek in the Latin. And it's a great word, because meekness was used before Jesus' time to describe the taming of a wild animal. Anyone work with wild animals here? Where's oh, she's probably downstairs, but Phoenix, 4-H, like that's animal husbandry, that's what that's all about. Think of a horse that hasn't been broken, that's not used to the hand. If you come near that horse, what's it going to do? Like, it's not going to go well for you. It's going to swing its head around, it's going to buck, it's going to kick, it's going to resist you putting a bridle and a bit on it. Why? Because it's not used to the hand. It's powerful. You better believe it's powerful. But its power isn't yet controlled. Once a horse becomes used to the hand, and its passions are channeled and subdued, and its strength is brought under control, actually that animal is quite at peace, isn't it? You ever seen an animal that's used to the hand and it's just totally at peace? Here's the thing. By nature, we are wild animals. We're like a wild donkey. That's the language of Jeremiah. We have strength and we have abilities, God-given talents, and often we don't use them the way we should. We don't control them. And at best, sometimes that leads to us being somewhat unproductive, and at worst, it's destructive. It's like a horse. Try Try entering a horse in a race that's not used to the hand and see how that goes. That horse will lose every time. A cow that's not used to the hand is going to be difficult. A horse that's not used to the hand is not going to be useful to a farmer or a guide or a rider. If he is full of strength and strong, but bucking and trying to kick you in the face, he is of no value. Even in a race, he's useless. Meek people are strong, but their strength is brought under control. Make sense? Meek people are the opposite of those who are overbearing. You ever met someone who just loves to throw their weight around? Talking to someone the other day, that they were given a position with authority, and all of a sudden they're cursing and yelling at people. And not in the church. Who is it? Tell me. Meek people are the opposite of those who are destructive and demanding and insist on their own way. Someone who is meek has been delivered from pride and assertiveness and harshness and aggression and being vengeful, like they got to get back at someone. Because like an animal, someone who is meek has learned to submit to the hand. There is an order that's actually been brought out of the chaos of their soul. And you know this. If you've ever met someone who loves to throw their weight around, they're actually not happy people. They're very insecure and they're very miserable. Meek people are humble, they're patient, they're gentle, they're forgiving, they're content. And Jesus says that the meek man or woman is what? Blessed.
Yes, yes.
Right up there. Blessed are the meek. There's a story we looked back a couple months ago in 2 Samuel. There's a guy, King David has had to leave the city because his special son is trying to overthrow him. And he's doing all sorts of terrible things. And David has to flee and leave the city. And you remember what happens as he's leaving the city? This guy, and what is he doing? He's hurling insults and stones at David. He's chucking rocks at him, and he says, "Get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul." And he's saying, "You've brought this on yourself, you're a murderer." And David's walking with his men who have swords. They have swords. And one of David's men, one of his right-hand men says, "Hey David, you're the king still. Don't forget that. You don't have to put up with this. This dog should not curse you." And he says this, he says, "Let's go over there and take off his head," right? Pull up the sword. That's what he says. Now, like this moment of confession, if I'm David and I'm the king and someone's throwing rocks at me, I'm probably listening to the guy beside me. He's like, "You know what? That's a good idea." Right? David has at his disposal all sorts of loyal men who are armed. He just has to give a word. He just has to nod his head, and that guy would have lost his head, quite literally. But David demonstrates meekness, strength under control, and he quite literally says, "Keep your sword in its sheath." And this is what it says in the text. David says, "No, let him curse. It might be that the Lord has told him to do it." And this is how the story ends. It says, David and his men continued down the road, and the man kept pace with them on a nearby hillside, cursing and throwing dirt and stones at David. Armed men. And they kept walking. That's meekness. David was not a wimp. It probably took him and his men everything they had not to kill that guy. They could have done it. David had killed thousands of men. Not a wimp. Meekness is strength under control, and it comes through submission. Think about a horse being used to the hand, right? Being tamed. Its strength is brought under control when it submits to what? What does a horse submit to? It submits to the rider and the bit and the bridle, right? And when it does that, then it's brought under control. For the Christians, it means submission to who? God. And each other, by the way. And I wanted to get into this. Quickly. Ephesians 5, I believe it is, talks about what someone looks like who's full of the Spirit. Says, don't be drunk with wine, be filled with the Spirit. Here's what someone looks like who's actually filled with the Spirit. They're singing hymns, songs, all this kind of stuff, right? That's one characteristic. What does it say? They're going to do thanksgiving. They're going to just be profusely thankful and pour their hearts out to the Lord and give God thanksgiving. We're going to do that next week. And we did that this morning. And then you know what it says next? and they submit to one another. That's someone who's full of the Spirit. They know how to submit. They submit to, but we also submit to God. James 1:21 says, receive with meekness the implanted word. It means we put ourselves under the authority of Scripture. We're to submit to God's word. We're to submit to God's will. We're to humble ourselves before God. In fact, 1 Peter 5:6 says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God. Now think about that. I'm like, yep. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. Who loves that language? Yeah, that's what I thought. We don't like that. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. That will grate on pretty much everyone's modern sensitivities. You do not want to be under the hand of anyone. I know that. You don't want to be under the thumb of anyone. Some of you are still trying to get under the hand or the thumb of your parents, or their memory, or a controlling spouse or an employer. It's like, now I got to deal with this whole God thing. Here's the cool thing. God's control over your life and your submission to Him, He has your best interest in mind. Listen to this. God's control is not one of manipulation, but it's for our benefit. Listen to this. Humble yourselves. This is I'll read it in context. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you. Casting all your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. Oh, maybe I can do that. Now, like, that changes things. Submitting to God is in our best interest. Do you believe that? How about this? Do you believe that aligning your will with God's will make you the most happy? I was talking to Lou this the other day. Most of you met Finn, my dog. I got a photo developed. He's 13 pounds. And I got a photo developed, and the lady, she saw the small thing, and she thought it was a horse at first, because he's just full of muscle, but he's 13 pounds. So it was a nice horse. No, it's a dog. The better trained he's become, and the more used to my hand he is, and the more submissive he becomes, the more at peace he is. You found that with pets? The more trained they are, the better he is around other people, the better he is around other dogs, and that inner turmoil, that inner chaos that especially a young dog struggles with, there's peace when he becomes used to the hand and he goes, okay, you're in control, I'm just going to take my cue from you. Way better off. My point is this, what is true for a dog is also true for us. What was true for Finn is also true for us. A fellow named Dick Lucas says, our creation mandate from Genesis 1 is this, we are to rule. Believe that? Creation mandate. Rule the fish, the birds, take care of creation. We're to be stewards over creation, and we're to govern ourselves and others. In fact, God has written in the world He made that there's rule, there's hierarchy, there's authority at every single level. So that means, and we know this, each and every one of you has some level of influence and authority in some area of your life. Right? You have influence. Maybe over your kids, maybe over your spouse, maybe over your grandkids, maybe at work, maybe at church. There is some area where you're to rule, and you're to rule well. And here's the question though. Left to our own, do we rule well? Huh? Do we use and steward the responsibility and the authority that God has entrusted in us, given to us? Do we use it well for His service and the service of others? So the question is, do we get it right most of the time? And I would say yes and no. Yeah, and Ray's like, no, it's just no. And here's the caveat. Outside of the knowledge and the sovereignty of God, we can't get it right. It always goes bad. And here's what I mean by this again. Again and again, you see in history, when power is given to man, and woman, I mean by that as well, man who has fallen, almost always that power corrupts the ruler unless one thing happens. Unless the ruler, him or herself, is governed by a higher ruler, it'll all go bad every time. Every time. We only rule well when we ourselves are ruled by and held accountable to a higher power. Every time. That works. So if you are not responsible to a power greater than yourself, in this case namely God, you over time will rule poorly. That's what will happen. So how do we learn to rule well? How do we submit ourselves? There's a verse we did almost a year ago in Matthew 11. I quoted from it. Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And then what does he say? Take my yoke upon you, for I am meek and humble in heart. So he'll teach us meekness. We can throw this up here. This is never going away. This is a yoke, right? Like that there. And those are supposed to be oxen horns, but they're devil horns. So do you know why how they would do this with oxen? Jesus says, "Be yoked to me." They would have an older oxen that knew how to do things, and they would pair an older oxen with what? This is distracting now, I know, but that's okay. They would pair it with the younger one, right? And the younger one would learn by walking alongside the older one. It would learn how the pace to go, what direction to go, and it would learn how to heed the master. Here's the point. We learn meekness by listening to Jesus. We learn meekness by surrendering to him for direction. We learn meekness by obeying him and following him, and by becoming used to his hand and taking his yoke on our shoulders. Only as we're united to Christ will we learn meekness. And here's the thing. As we become used to the hand of Christ on our lives, as we place ourselves under his authority, I can guarantee you this. This is unequivocal. You will become a better husband. You will become a better wife. You will become a better son, a daughter. You will be able to rule and steward the influence and the power and authority that God has given you better than if you're not yoked to Jesus. Unequivocally. That's why I always say, I have no problem telling people, get your butts in church. Because you're going to be better off for it. Because we have to place ourselves under the submission of God. That's how it's designed to work. So here's where do we fall short, and this is really like my confession time. So I can only speak for myself. So a couple things where we fall short. One of the problems I ran into early in ministry when I first started out was that I had very high expectations of people. I had expectations. Turns out that was a bad idea. I had expectations of our board. I had expectations of volunteers. I had high expectations for myself. Some of you are the same way, right? Set the bar high. And so early on in my ministry, I was perpetually disappointed with people. Anyone ever been there? No, you know what I'm talking about. Some of us, and here's the catch though. Some of you here this morning, most of us, we have very high expectations of certain people. For some of you, it's your spouse. For some of you, it's your kids. For some of you, it's other Christians, and the bar that you set for them is way up here, and they're never going to be able to jump over. For some of you, it's the pastor, and you expect your pastor to be perfect. You're just looking for me to screw up. I was like, I don't visit with him. No, I'm just joking. And in your mind, in your eyes, everyone falls short, right? And we know this. Well, how do you know this? Because you're always frustrated with people. You're angry with someone all the time. You talk, I find, even with Christians, I meet with Christians, and what can you tell me? And they're telling me how stupid and lazy someone is that they know, or how they're doing something wrong. And they think that they're so smart and everyone else is the problem. But the problem is this: if everyone else is always the problem, who's probably the problem? Me. Yeah. Because I'm imposing unrealistic expectations on everyone that I meet. I don't know what is pride, and it's sin. We feel superior to other people, I'm a better driver. And that is true. But, you look at a decision someone else made. How many of you done this? You're I wouldn't have made that decision. Oh, no, I don't find that too funny, do you? Or if I would have done this differently, or if I was... And here's the cool thing. When the Bible says God looks at us, you know what it says he does when he sees? Psalm 103, you should have kept going, but it would have been a long ways. But it says this: the Lord is like a father to his children. It plays right into what you're talking about. He's tender, compassionate to those who fear him. And then listen to this, verse 14. For he knows how weak we are, and he remembers that we're only dust. Eugene Peterson puts it, he knows us inside and out, and he keeps in mind that we're made of mud. That's how God sees you. That's good news. That's why he sent his son to die for you. Because you're not perfect either. Why are you holding people to a standard that you're not even holding yourself to, or God doesn't hold you to? The meek person does not focus on the faults of others. That's why they're not pulling out the sword. How many people in your life right now are you angry, frustrated, or disappointed with?
We have to say?
No, probably better not. You're on the board, so let's just keep that quiet. Why is it? unrealistic expectations, and we can focus on the negative a lot. Can't we? There's a great verse in Philippians 4:8. And you've memorized it in Sunday school if you grew up in the church, right? Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just. Did I get it right? Yeah, pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable. If there's anything worthy of excellence or worthy of praise, think about these things. And we take that verse, we're like, that's how we need to live our lives. Like, I can't dwell on the negative. That's how we look at this, right? We're like, I need to dwell on the positive things, and like, so I feel better. And I've never taken that verse and say, maybe that's the grid through which I need to be looking at other people. Ever thought of it that way? Whatever is true and good and pure and noble, that's how I should evaluate others. That's the verse by which I should see other people in the church. Because some of us, and I'm just going to be honest, like I can do this, I'm very good at seeing all the flaws. Like it's a gift. And sometimes we love to point it out in others, right? And I think we would be better served, our spouses would be better served, our kids would be better served, our church would be better served if we were all about pointing out what's the good in other people. I read a thing from a guy named Colin Smith, and he says, picture this, you know, like behind Canadian Tire there, you know when they're putting up new homes, right? And you can see they got the homes dug, and Lane Merritt did a good job, right? And sometimes you just see a hole in the ground. And then beside that there's a foundation, and like, you know, there's a place that's got pretty much everything done, and a place with walls, and they're all at different stages of development. But you look at the places and you look at an empty lot, or maybe it's got a hole, you're like, when are they ever going to finish this place? Like, what is this? Here's the point. Christians, all of us, everyone you meet, not even just Christians, we're all at different stages of development. All of us. We're somewhere along the continuum there. Some of you, and like some of you are just, I'm like, that's who I want to be when I get old, because they reflect Jesus. Jesus has been formed in this person. They get it. They know that they've been saved to serve. They are gentle. They are meek. They epitomize the Beatitudes, and that's some of us. And I'm like, I can see that. Like, that's a fully built house. And then we look at other people like, just a hole in the ground. They're like, they just got the forms, and that's it. Like, oh, come on, let's get going. And we never think, at least they got the hole dug. At least they got the forms poured. That's a start. Way to go. Like, we celebrate every part of the process. Quit setting the bar so high for everyone. Why do we do that? Whatever is true, pure, noble, lovely. I would challenge all of us, and this is for myself, look for whatever evidence of grace or growth that God is doing in a person's life and focus on that. Because we're all at different stages. Isn't that the way it should be? How do we get there? I'll tell you how we get there. You got to go back to the first beatitude. That's how you got to recognize that I owe God everything and I can give him nothing, right? And God owes me nothing and he's given me everything. And we all come to him on the basis of the cross, and that I'm no more special than you and you're no more special than me. We're all recipients of grace. We're all sinners saved by grace. And then Jesus says, those who exalt themselves and pump themselves up will be humbled, but those who humble themselves will be exalted. So we kind of come with poverty of spirit. And then next he says, we need to mourn over our sin. You know who the worst sinner in this church is that I know? Me. Because I know myself better than any of you. And I know where I fall short in all sorts of areas. I recognize that God has given me a brain, and I've used this brain to question him and judge him, like with the very brain he's given me. I know that my pride and my sense of self-righteousness to him is like filthy rags, and go look that up. It's a very vivid image. And I know at the end of the day that my only hope and comfort and consolation and forgiveness and freedom is found at the cross. And that's true for me, and that's true for all of us. So I'm humbled. Then he gets to meekness. Only when we've examined our own faults and we see kind of where all the holes are, then we can say, you know what, like, I got some walls going on, and God loves me, and I'm growing. I'm not gonna kick people because they're here or here. I'm just happy that we're all on this journey together, and I'm gonna love you for that. Thomas Watson said how easily God could crush sinners and kick them into hell, but he moderates his anger. He puts up with us when we dishonor him. Even when he's provoked, he restrains the judgment that would crush us. Our job as Christians is not to tear down, it's not to crush, it's not to destroy, but it's to bind, to heal, to build up the broken, to save and redeem. I'm going to share this. Meekness. Power, strength, under control. In what area of our lives is the playing field almost level when it comes to power and control and strength? For all of us. The tongue. Proverbs 18:21 says, the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Proverbs 12:18 says, the words of the reckless pierce like swords. Pierce like swords, or there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. James 3 says, we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, and we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and itself is set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, sea creatures are being tamed under the hand and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a relentless, reckless evil full of deadly poison. Blah. Meek people control the tongue. The tongue becomes the sword. They control their words, their language, the harshness. Paul says this. He says this in Ephesians 4. In your anger, do not sin. Why? And maybe you haven't done this because a lot of you have been Christians longer than me. But when you get angry, hey, just me, we say all sorts of stupid stuff and the sword comes out right away. When you are angry, how easy is it to pull that sword out? Like it's just second nature. It's like someone's throwing rocks at me. I know, it makes sense. Some of us, when we get angry, we just start swinging. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. Do not give the devil a foothold. It's not saying Mel and I struggle with this. She'll remember this. It's like we're not supposed to let the sun go down in our anger, so we'd have an argument. We'd have to figure it out all night. Like, no, we just don't go to bed angry. Like, this is going to take days to sort out. But let's just not go to bed angry. Because why? Nip it in the bud. Why? Because the longer that you stew, the angrier you get, the more likely you are to pull up that sword and start swinging it. And that sword brings death. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Saying, don't be quick to pull out the sword. Self-control. Keep it by your side. And some of us, I just saw that analogy, some of us are like these little pots. And you put water in a little pot and put high heat, you know what's going to happen? That water is going to boil out right away. Right? And some of us are like a little pot that boils so fast. And you're laughing because you know that. And other people are like this big pot, and it takes a long time to boil. And God help you when it boils over, because what happens? It's like a volcano. And there is water everywhere. It says, nip anger in the bud. Don't give the devil a foothold. Now I'll come back to what I came on earlier with David. David and his men kept their sword sheathed. And some people, meek people who are yoked to Jesus, have an incredible ability to keep that sword in its sheath. Even when they're provoked. We saw it with David. Who else do we see it with in Scripture? That's an easy one. Like it's the answer you're thinking. Jesus, on the cross, crucified, beaten, scourged, whipped, nails. Even on the cross, who's in control? Jesus. Even on the cross, he's in control. When he finally speaks, because he's silent before Pilate and his accusers, when he finally speaks, what does he say? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
That's Paul.
And here's the secret, and I believe this is the hardest thing about meekness. And we see this in Jesus, because it says, Peter writes, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten. Oh, that's so hard. But he continued entrusting himself to the one who judges justly. When the soldiers mocked Jesus, when they spit on him, when they slapped at him, when they nailed him to the cross, when the guys that were crucified beside him, they hurled abuse at him. He was laughed at, jeered at. With perfect justice, Jesus could have said, "You wait! I could send the whole host of heaven down. You can spend an eternity in hell." But he doesn't. He prays that they would be forgiven. Why? And that this is your Savior, folks. This is the one we sing to. He came not to bear the sword, but to bear your sin. That's the one that we're yoked to. He didn't come bearing the sword. He will come one day bearing the sword. But you don't have to worry about that if you know him. But he came to bear our sin. And here's what bearing sin involves. It involves absorbing the injuries that others have committed to us. It involves absorbing the injuries that other people have inflicted. And again, take your lead from Jesus. What does Peter say again? He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross. He took on himself the cost, the penalty, the pain, the injury, the justice for your sin. He absorbed it. He bore it in his body. Instead of inflicting that on us and cutting us with the sword, he was cut by the sword. He went to the cross. He experienced violence. Louis was here this week, and I told him he can use my truck whenever he wants. But I put some conditions on it because I told him my truck is very recognizable in this town. So no stop signs, like you gotta obey all of them. No hitting kids, no running over kittens, no flipping people off. Whatever it is, you're gonna use my truck and you're gonna be responsible. But let's say he hits something. Let's say he backs into a retaining wall and damages my truck and now it won't drive properly. What are our options? Pretty simple, right? I could demand that he pay, which would be appropriate, by the way. I could refuse and say, "Louis, you don't have to pay anything." Or we could say, "You know what, like accidents happen, let's just split it 50-50, right? But what's the point? Someone has to pay. There is a cost. That's economics. But this works on all sorts of levels. When someone hurts you and you want to hurt them back, you want to pull out the sword. You want to make them pay and make them suffer like you've suffered. And that is true in all of our lives. Someone gossips. Someone damages your reputation. You want to damage theirs. Someone robs you of your freedom or your happiness or your health. And even if they said they're sorry to you, you still want to make them pay. We do this all the time. They're like, "No, we don't." Yes, you do. There's people in your life right now that you are giving the cold shoulder to. They're like, "They can pay. I just won't talk to them as much." We may say things that hurt them. When they suffer, we might feel satisfaction. There's another option, which is that we absorb the debt and we refuse to make them pay for what they did. And a fellow, Tim Keller, says that's even harder. He says this: to refrain from lashing out at someone when you want to do so with all your being is agony. It is a form of suffering. You not only suffer the original loss of happiness, reputation, and opportunity, but now you forego the consolation of inflicting the same upon them. You are absorbing the debt, taking the cost completely on yourself instead of taking it out on the other person. Meekness involves bearing the sins of others and absorbing the injuries they inflict. What does the cross say? Jesus took, 50% of our sin and said, "I'll take half, you take half"?
Yes.
No! He said, "I'll take all of it. Past, present, and future, and I'll pay it in full." Here's the question. What injury do you need to absorb and say, "I'm no longer going to make this person in my life pay for it. I'm not going to pull out the sword any longer. I'm going to stop making them pay. I'm going to take the hit because Jesus took the hit for me. I'm going to refuse to hit back." And then this is where we'll end. You say, like, "Bryan, that sounds so nice." You have no idea what I've been through, right? I have someone who's experiencing not only emotional, but maybe for the rest of their life, physical effects from an injustice that was done to them. How does this work? How do we keep our sword in the sheath? How does that work in the real world? How does that work on Monday? Look at the last part of this verse. What does it say? "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." You know where that's from? From Psalm 37. And again, Psalm 37 says this: "Do not fret because of evil people, those plot, they scheme, they use raw power to get their way. It says, the wicked who draw the sword, don't be like them." You know, and you say, well, how in the world will we ever get ahead as Christians? How will we ever come out on top if we keep this thing sheathed all the time and we don't swing it once in a while? If we don't throw our weight in around, because everyone else is. How do you make it in the world without stepping over other people to get to the top and not putting people in their place? What's the answer? How do we do it? Well, you know what verse 11, and it's the answer to the psalm. Verse 11 in Psalm 37 says this, the meek shall inherit the land. It's the whole point. You know what that word inheritance means? Unless your parents aren't totally terrible, do you have to work for your inheritance? It's a gift. And here's the point, context of all of Psalm 37. We don't have to throw our weight around. We don't have to sheathe our swords. We don't have to rely on our own strength. You know why? Because the Lord is our strength. The Lord is our strength. If you were to grow in meekness, if you were to absorb the cost, if you were to display strength under control, the Lord must be your strength. Because if I'm to live this out, I need a strength greater than myself. Because I can't do this. I can't absorb the cost on my own. And here's the thing, Christianity knows nothing about doing this under your own strength. It's all about being yoked to Jesus. If you have unrealistic expectations of others, if you've set the bar so high, if you expect everyone to be here, you know the only way that's going to change is if Jesus comes in and lives in me and changes the way I see people. If I'm like a little pot that soon boils over, I need Jesus to come into me and change the way I look. If you're like this big pot and like it's going to geyser and volcano at a certain point and you're just stewing and stewing and stewing, you need Jesus to come in you in order to change. If we're people that just, we're good at picking out the faults and nitpicking other people, Jesus must be my strength. That's how it works. He needs to work in us and through us. So here's the question. What now are you trying to do in your life under your own strength and power that you have no business trying to do under your own strength and power, that you need to come to the cross and say, Jesus, help me do this because I can't do this? There's some area of your life you're bitter, you're resentful, you're angry, you're frustrated. I'll leave you with this. Jesus went through a lot. He had it pretty bad. Then they nailed him to a cross. You ever notice he wasn't bitter? You ever notice he didn't blame other people? He didn't hang from the cross. We have no record of him cursing Judas or saying, you weak-kneed Pilate, you scumbag, grow a spine. He didn't accuse the Pharisees. He did none of that. He didn't blame one person. How was he able to do this? I want to leave you with this. How did he do it? It's all about where his focus was. In his toughest hours, he faced down the cross. His focus wasn't on Judas. It wasn't on Pilate. It wasn't on the Pharisees. It wasn't on all his friends who fled and forsook him. Where was his focus? Where was he looking? Even as he suffered. Where was he looking in the Garden of Gethsemane? At the Father. He even saw the cup of his suffering from the hand of the Father. Some of us are so angry, we're so bitter, we're so frustrated, we're so disappointed. We can't let stuff go. We can't keep our mouths shut. We can't stop from pulling out the sword and swinging it. We don't want to absorb the debt because I see my entire life story as being shaped and controlled by what other people have done to you. And yet Jesus, he's able to look at what people did to him. And what does he do? He says, Father, forgive him. Father, forgive him. And he can pray that because his focus isn't on them. It's on the Father. Even on the cross, and you can challenge me on this, as he hangs from the cross, he's not looking down on his enemies and judging them. He's looking up to the Father. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. His Father is his source of strength. The meek person is able to display power and strength under control because God is his or her strength. If you hear nothing else this morning, hear this. Look up. Look up. And maybe, just maybe, that lack of peace you have, that reason that we're filled with anger and disappointment and frustration and resentment, is because we are busy looking down and out at others and we're not looking up at God. He's our strength. Meekness, strength under control, comes to those who look up and say, Lord, you are my strength, you are my hope, you are my song. Look up. Look up.